Hi, I'm here tonight to talk to you about being weird. When someone calls you weird, it's usually because you're doing something or saying something that someone else isn't. Next slide. Here's a bit of an example. And it's not a replica of me. It's actually a story that I did. I'm an architect, a filmmaker, an author, and in visual effects, I'm an animator. So I've done a bunch of things, and in each of those things, I've always focused on doing something that's different and outside of the box. And FUGU TAKO is one of those things. It's a story of two Japanese salarymen who go into a sushi bar one night, and one of them eats a live sushi, and his head transforms to the shape of a pufferfish, and he has to live with that, and finds out that it's actually not as bad as what he thought. So I'm going to show you the film now.
いや本当やばかったですよ。ほら、乾杯。
これダメ。これダメだよ。おい、板前。お前だよ。全然気が悪いよそれ。
あまりよく覚えてないんですけど、寿司屋に行って多分フグを食べたんでしょうね。これから大変だと思うよ。こう顔がパーンと腫れ上がっちゃってさ、もう何するにももういろんなことで面倒だと思うんだけどな。
お友達は変わったねっておっしゃいますか？
僕も魚に変わった方がいいのかなと思ってますけどね。
So you might be wondering how an Australian makes a film about a guy whose head turns into a pufferfish, and it's in Japanese. Well, it's a long story, but we'll get to that at the end. I've been called a defector, an expatriate, an outsider, maverick, in essence a bit of a freak, and it's because I do things differently. And so tonight I'm going to talk about embracing your inner weirdness. I grew up in Papua New Guinea. It's a small island in the north of Australia. It's a very primitive country. I was an expatriate there, and for people who don't know what an expatriate is, it's a person who's living in a foreign country or living in exile, depending on your perspective. And as a child, I knew I was an outsider, but it didn't feel unnatural to me. It felt normal. You know, Papua New Guinea was very primitive and colliding with the modern world, and in a sense inventing itself and finding a new identity. And so was I. And the expatriates there were collectively weird, but we just didn't know it. We were kind of growing up in a bubble outside of our historical birthplace, so we were able to be whatever we wanted to be. And in essence, it was like the village wasn't raising the child. And then I moved back to Australia, and it was like moving back to a whole other village. There I was a weirdo, and weirdo is, like, Australians tend to put an O on everything. If your name's Shane, you're going to be called Shane-O. And so I was a weirdo and a little bit weird, and I didn't fit in. And as a creative now, you know, being a filmmaker and an architect and working in films and other things, that's perfectly fine for me. I feel like as a creative, it's such an essential core part of what I do, and just sort of getting outside of the box. Even standing in this like red circle right now is a bit weird. I feel much more comfortable sort of, you know, off on the edge, you know, looking in, being an outsider. That's a place where I like to be. And I'm not saying fitting in is bad. I think it can work for some people, but it does mean that there's an adherence to a sort of a conformity to a set of rules. You are setting yourself up in a way to be in a place that's comfortable, and it's safe, essentially. And that's a place where I think it's very hard to progress and move forward and make discoveries. Pushing yourself outside of the circle, if you like, forces you to see things in a different way. And that's an essential part of growth. It's an essential part of being creative, and an essential part of being weird. So that's how I kind of challenged myself. I was speaking to a friend of mine the other day who's also an architect, and he's in artificial intelligence. and robot design, and he's working with a falconer, and a falconer is a person who trains a bird to fly off and hunt, and has a simple set of commands. It raises the hood off the bird, and the bird goes, but it only has a limited memory. It can only remember the command for a certain amount of time. So he's trying to gain something from that. He's looking outside of his gamut, looking outside of his small set of parameters that he's working with, and trying to get something from the outside that influences it. And his next subject is a donkey. Donkeys don't want to fall off cliffs. They go through the Grand Canyon without any fuss. They don't go down holes. They're very stubborn. And that's something that you want in a robot. You don't want a robot to fall over. And so he's, between a robot, a falcon, and a donkey, he'll probably end up with an amazing working rumba that'll sweep someone's carpet. But in essence, I think the point of the story is that he's breaking through his set of parameters and looking outside and seeing what outside influence can do. He's experimenting. When I was studying at university as an architect, we used to draw our designs with ink pen and paper, and I was really terrible at it. We would have to scrape off the mistakes with razor. There was no undo button in those days. And so I would present my plans and hold them up, and they'd look somewhat like the Dead Sea Scrolls with all of these sort of patches and holes and things in them. And I thought there has to be an easy way. And computers were just sort of coming into the fray in terms of design. Now it sounds kind of crazy because we're also used to computers today, but 20 years ago, the university I was going to didn't want any drawings or concepts or design development done in computers. They felt like if you had a computer, then somehow you were cheating, that the computer was doing the work, which seems like a marvel now. But that was the thinking at that time. And so I went and got some pirate software and decided to teach myself. And by night, I was sort of hacking away on the computer and figuring out ways to do these designs, and discovered that I could actually do these designs and created a completely different way of visualizing my creative process and architecture as a result. It led to me actually in my final year in my master's walking away from architecture and going off in a different direction. I started animation at that point and became more involved in that, and there was various sort of leapfrogging that I did throughout my career, but always in the search of doing something different and challenging myself. And ironically, I now teach architecture students in their masters at SciArc and UCLA about new ways of envisioning architecture. So it's kind of had a full circle. And maybe I should be teaching them how to scratch on pen and paper. In any case, I think one of the things that I'm saying is that having that determination, that ability to push yourself outside of your boundaries and take those risks is really important. And I think once you've done that, once you've stepped out, like I did, and stepped out of that and felt committed to what I had to do in order to have a progression and growth, there was no turning back. And in Papua New Guinea, they have a saying, and it's called "gone pinis," which sounds like "gone penis," but it was very confusing for a child. But it actually means going finish, and that means going home. So for expatriates that were in Papua New Guinea, if they were going finish, they were going to go back home. And when they went back home, they discovered that things hadn't changed that much at home, but they changed. The process of being away, process of leaving their birthplace, their place of safety, if you like, had changed them. The experiment of doing that had changed them, and they just couldn't go back in terms of their progression and their ideas. So I think that's something that I always encourage people when I'm working with them to push outside of those boundaries. It's a little like if your head changes into a pufferfish, it's pretty hard to go back. So when I first came up with that idea to make the film, I was in a place, I had a lot of success as a director, and I was working with Radical Media, and I had my own visual effects company, and by all accounts I should have been really happy and in some ways content. But that just wasn't in me. That wasn't who I was. That sort of yearning to push myself further and go outside those barriers was still present. And I decided I needed to step out of that and try to have a new journey and almost like to be like that expatriate again as when I was a child. I wanted to go overseas. So I thought I'll either go to US, Canada, or the UK, which are not very exotic places. There's no cannibals to speak of, at least ones that I know. And so I thought I'll make a film that stands out and something that's international. So I came out with that idea. Most people thought I was crazy. They thought that no one's going to get it. It's kind of too ridiculous. That sort of spurred me on even further. At the same time, as a film's in Japanese, and I don't speak a word of Japanese, so that was equally kind of crazy to all my friends and associates. And so they were really encouraging me not to do it. Don't do this. This weird thing. This isn't going to work out. But I pressed on. And I made the film, and this incredible discovery that I had making the film and working with the actors was watching them perform in Japanese. I no longer needed the words. I didn't need to listen, because as a director, you're listening for the actors and are they getting the dialogue? Is everything being performed as scripted? Things like that. But I couldn't understand a word, but there was a kind of crystal clarity that came over me in terms of understanding what was happening on a human level, on a very innate level, and a very instinctual level, and that was a very transformative moment for me. It informed both me as a director and a creative in terms of approaching things and being open to that and taking risks and discovering that an experiment can actually push you into a place of finding out something that you had no idea about before and can change you in ways that will follow you for the rest of your life. And that's certainly what happened for me while I made that film. So it brought me to the US. I had another unexpected thing when I came here. I met a whole bunch of other expats who had a similar view. They wanted to do things differently and bring together their collective experiences and step outside of their safety zones to create great things. And in essence, I was an expat as a child and expat as an adult, and I felt like coming here I'd found my tribe. And I made another film. This is the second in 3 films. They're all kind of weird, but this one's titled Freaks.
I got teased a lot at school by the kids, but Mum always said I had a really good eye, so.
It started to grow when my grandfather told me to listen to things.
And I realised, of course, that I was much more capable with my hands than the other children.
Primarily, I was the kid that always was able to put 2 fists in my mouth. Generally one kid, 1 fist.
So you just learn to cover it up.
Massive eye, uneven eyes.
My granddad would just say, oh, look, I've got one, and, it's put me in good stead all my life, so, yeah.
Pupil face.
He's got such a big mouth, he never shuts up. He's always talking, He can't help it. That's the problem.
I don't go out much, but all my friends know about them. People like me.
And I think we all have our own interesting quirks and things that make us unique.
It's good to be around other people that are creative, that have that same vision. Creative vision, not actual vision. They wouldn't have the same actual vision.
So suitably weird. But I think now, one of the things of being an outsider or doing things differently, being an expatriate or a nonconformist in many ways, means that it implies that you've got to go it alone. But the reality is there are people out there, there are like-minded people that can encourage you along the way and challenge you to even push yourself further. So that's something that I encourage everybody. And that's certainly an experience I've had coming to the United States. Thank you.